Wait, isn't my mic on? 'Cause, yo, sometimes I be doing all this shit with my mic literally off. Okay, can you hear me? I'm up. I think I'm gonna cut this out, but let me restart. Let me restart. Yo, so if it's y'all boys Ego in here, you know what's going on. Today we are going to be reacting to extinct animals that might still be alive. Now you're probably thinking, if they're extinct. Wait, am I saying that word right? Man, whatever. Let's watch the video.
It's illegal to drive without car insurance in almost every US
I'ma
state,
take
but
this
there's
out.
one thing you could try pretty much any time if you want to save money. So I found this website, and look at the difference. $159 a month. I thought this was the best.
Individuals anywhere on Earth. But that known part does quite the heavy lifting here. The concept of extinction seems pretty straightforward. An animal disappears, scientists search for it, find nothing, and eventually label it extinct. Case closed. But in reality, it doesn't always work like that, as nature occasionally has the helpful habit of tearing up our metaphorical paperwork. Officially, we generally report animals as being extinct when there's no reasonable doubt that the last individual has died, basically meaning there are no known living individuals anywhere on Earth. But that known part does quite the heavy lifting here, because despite our satellites, sensors, and selfie sticks poking to every corner of the planet, our knowledge has gaps the size of continents. Literally. I mean, we've barely mapped 20% of the ocean. And then when you add on the fact that half the time we can't even find our own car keys, even when they are sitting in plain sight, well, imagine just how challenging finding the last surviving member of a species is. So that's all to say that even when we declare an animal to be extinct, there is a chance that it actually still lives. Few animals blur this line like the Japanese wolf, scientifically known as Canis lupus hautophalax. Once native to the islands of Honshu, Shikoku, and Kyushu, the Japanese wolf was declared extinct in 1905, following a brutal triple whammy: rabies outbreaks, habitat destruction, and then the final nail in the coffin, a government extermination campaign. But this wasn't just any wolf disappearing to the mist of extinction. This was the erasure of an animal that had been woven into the very fabric of Japanese society and spirituality for centuries. In Shintoism, the Japanese state religion, the Okami, meaning wolf, was revered as a messenger of the gods, or kami spirits, and a protector against crop raiders like wild boar and deer. In fact, so revered were these animals that approximately 20 Shinto wolf shrines still stand on Honshu alone, and even villages across the mountains still carry names like Okami-iwa, meaning wolf rock, and Okami-taira, meaning wolf plateau, just serving as cultural echoes of an animal that supposedly vanished more than a century ago. And one of the most fascinating pieces of folklore that's also relevant to our story is the Okuri Okami, or escort wolf. Wolves that would allegedly follow lone travelers through the forest at night, accompanying them safely to their destination without doing them any harm. And then, beyond culturally, this wolf was further impressive as it was a rather divergent subspecies of gray wolf that might actually have been closely related to the first wolf ancestors of man's best friend. To be exact, a 2024 study found that Japanese wolves were not only more closely related to Eurasian wolves than North American wolves, but that they were also more closely related to domestic dogs than to other wolves. And then in addition, further analysis on its DNA revealed that some modern Japanese dog breeds, like the Kishu and Shiba Inu, possess some of the exact same genetic markers as the Japanese wolves, serving as living proof of ancient crossbreeding that has preserved fragments of the wolf's genome even to this day. The Japanese wolf was also physically distinct, representing one of the smallest gray wolf subspecies out there, only standing a mere 56 to 58 centimeters at the shoulder, or about 22 inches, which, to put that into perspective, is barely bigger than a border collie. While on the other hand, North American gray wolves can measure up to 91.5 centimeters, or 36 inches, at the shoulder, making them over 50% taller. But it is this small stature that might have theoretically helped it avoid complete extermination, potentially. Because while it has been declared extinct, there have been dozens of reported sightings that have emerged from the remote mountains of Honshu and Shikoku, the same misty forest that this animal once called home. And these aren't just campfire stories told by hikers who've had too much sake, as some of them even come with photos and videos that defy easy explanation. And one of the most compelling examples of this occurred in 1996 in the Chichibu Tamakai National Park. A wildlife photographer named Hiroshi Yagi found himself face to face with a wolf-like creature calmly walking alongside the road. And not only did he manage to see it, he also managed to photograph it several times. And when wildlife experts examined the images, many of them agreed that the animal bore striking anatomical similarities to the supposedly extinct Japanese wolf. And more importantly, it did not match any known domestic dogs or other wild canids in the region. And what made this encounter even more unusual was the animal's behavior. It showed no fear of humans, walking right up to Yagi, which matches not only historical accounts of the Japanese wolf's relative boldness around people, but if you also remember, it also matches the legend of the Okuri Okami, the escort wolf. In fact, this experience was so compelling that Yagi and his team placed over 70 camera traps across the entire region in hopes of capturing this elusive wolf. And this measure finally ended up bearing fruit in 2018, when a video recorded a deer running by, and in the background of that video was some very interesting audio, howling. And yes, howling itself is not indicative of even a wolf, let alone a presumed extinct one, but the howling was analyzed by zoologists, who concluded that not only did these sounds not match domestic dogs, but rather that they sounded eerily similar to another subspecies of gray wolf, the eastern wolf, which is a North American wolf, and thus obviously does not inhabit Japan. However, despite all these tantalizing clues, I will say that significant doubt still persists among experts, with historical records showing that Japanese wolves typically traveled in small packs, yet most reported sightings are of solitary individuals. And more critically, the wolf's primary habitat, deciduous forests, composed largely of Japanese beech, has been dramatically altered, with over 40% of these forests having been logged following World War II. And unfortunately, since 2018, there have been no further confirmed recordings or sightings. But considering that potential evidence has extended up until 2018, more than 100 years after its declared extinction, this does point to at least the possibility that the Japanese wolf still might be prowling these misty mountains. And until we can get more concrete evidence of its presence, the Japanese wolf remains suspended in that curious limbo between confirmed extinction and possible survival. But while the
What are y'all thoughts on that? Do y'all think it's alive or not? Personally, I'm the one that took it. I'm the one that took a picture of it, so I think it's alive. But I'm just
Japanese wolf might be playing hide and seek in mountainous forests, another apex predator is possibly engaging in an even more impressive vanishing and potential reappearing act, all the while on a tropical island which measures only 85 kilometers or 53 miles in length. So in other words, in a place where hiding spots are relatively limited. So picture this, a small, isolated African island where the waves crash against white sand beaches. Tourists sip cocktails at resorts, and somewhere in the island's shrinking forests, one of the world's most famous big cats might still be stalking through the shadows. And this isn't the setup for a thriller novel, but rather the real-life mystery of Unguja Island, the largest island in Tanzania's Zanzibar archipelago, and home to the Zanzibar leopard. The Zanzibar leopard is thought to have evolved in isolation from mainland leopards since at least the end of the last ice age, when rising sea levels separated the island from Tanzania roughly 10,000 years ago. This isolation led to it both becoming smaller than its continental cousins and developing a relatively distinct appearance, with the typical leopard rosettes having partially transformed into spots. And yet, despite its isolation and odd appearance, it's actually not as genetically distinct as one would think, being less divergent than other leopard subspecies which are in mainland Africa. But nevertheless, it had called this island home for over 10,000 years. But in the 1990s, the Zanzibar leopard was declared extinct. But unlike many extinction stories involving habitat loss or hunting for fur, this wasn't a case of gradual decline, but rather a systematic eradication fueled by something far more primal: fear and superstition. You see, these animals weren't just feared as predators, they were demonized with the widespread belief that they were products of witchcraft. And according to deeply entrenched local beliefs, these leopards weren't just wild animals, but were rather kept and trained by witches to harass or harm villagers. And farmers especially embraced these ideas as explanations for why leopards appeared around their farms, with this, in their minds, not being just animal behavior, but rather malevolent witchcraft manifested in feline form. And with the growth of both agriculture and population in the region throughout the 20th century, this conflict only became worse. And what began as isolated incidents of farmers killing leopards snowballed into something much larger and darker, reaching its climax in 1964, when authorities launched an island-wide anti-witchcraft campaign that specifically targeted the Zanzibar leopard. And unsurprisingly, what better way to catch witches and their evil companions than hiring a witch finder? And yes, I'm not joking, this was the leader of the island-wide extermination campaign. And unfortunately for our feline friend, this supernatural reputation proved too much, with these campaigns, and the general attitude towards them, pushing them to the brink of extinction. And by the late 1990s, wildlife officials reluctantly declared the species likely eradicated from the island. But thankfully, nature seemed to have some differing opinions, as despite the official extinction declaration, sightings of leopards never completely stopped, with local villagers reporting encounters throughout the supposed extinction period. And then in the early 2000s, leopard scat, or feces, was found, potential gold for wildlife biologists who were seeking DNA evidence of its continued survival. But of course, in a cruel twist of fate, the samples were lost before they could be analyzed. However, in 2018, a very interesting discovery was made when a documentary crew from Animal Planet captured footage of what appeared to be a leopard on a camera trap. And this wasn't just some blurry figure in the distance, as the footage very clearly showed that it was a leopard. And so this was obviously big news, because if accurate, it could be proof of a surviving Zanzibar leopard population. The only problem is, though, that experts remain divided on whether it was truly the native Zanzibar subspecies, or potentially a mainland African leopard that was somehow introduced
The noble right says comply. The people say aye.
to the island. So honestly, the verdict is still out. But signs do seem to be pointing in a rather optimistic direction. And if it has survived, that will be a true testament of persistence. Not only surviving a near-century-long extermination campaign, fueled, mind you, by supernatural fear, but also doing so on a tiny island as an apex predator. Not bad. But sometimes, an animal doesn't just go extinct. It transcends into legend. And such is the case with the Campophyllus principalis, also known as the ivory-billed woodpecker, a bird so magnificent it earned the nickname the Lord God bird. And why, you ask? Well, because when people spotted one, their first reaction was reportedly to exclaim, "Lord God, what a bird." A little cheesy, but true. Once the largest woodpecker in North America, it inhabited the bottomland hardwood forests of the